Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello, I'm Paul Fredette.
And I'm Karen Fredette.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us again, or maybe for the first time, as we continue this series of reflections on the life and the times of Clare of Assisi, a truly remarkable woman of religion and an extraordinary person by the standards of her own day as well as by our own in the 21st century. In the years that followed Francis of Assisi's death in 1226, Clare, for whom Francis had been a lifelong friend, a soulmate, a spiritual father and guide, not only learned how to deal on her own with the tremendous growth that the monasteries of the Poor Ladies were experiencing at that time. Newly founded monasteries of the Poor Ladies were dotting the entire Italian peninsula, as well as now throughout Europe as well. Even more than this, she was the one who single-handedly clung to and fought to retain the original vision and the legacy of Francis himself, both in her own way of life and for her sisters as well. Her personal sanctity and her extraordinary gifts, especially the gifts of healing, for which she was becoming renowned, we talked about last week, and she was becoming just well known throughout the Italian peninsula. And she was credited, in fact, with saving her own monastery, as well as the entire city of Assisi itself in the summer of 1241 from the invading armies, the Saracen mercenaries that had been hired by Emperor Frederick II, who were laying siege to Assisi. Through the powers of her own intercessory prayers and her personal courage. All this despite the fact that at this point in her life, Clare is pretty much confined to her bed for very long periods due to this debilitating illness that will eventually take her life, but not just yet. Last week also we discussed how at this time an extraordinary relationship is developing. We have a picture of Clare that perhaps reflects what Clare looked like at this period in her life. It's a wonderful picture of a mature woman whose life has been marked by great joy but considerable pain as well. It's a very mature picture of Clare and a very lovely one, a very inspiring one.
Yet we ordinarily see pictures of her as a beautiful young woman. And we have to realize that she lived to what was considered a ripe old age in her time.
This is the picture taken at the time, or not taken at the time, but painted in that time of Agnes of Prague. And it's this relationship that is developing at this point. Agnes is the Bohemian princess who had actually refused the proposal of marriage to the Emperor Frederick II and entered a newly founded monastery of the Poor Ladies right there in Prague. I can only imagine, Karen, that when word started to spread that this Bohemian princess and noble women of her court had actually entered the monastery of the Poor Ladies, and within a few months that Agnes herself had become the abbess of this monastery, that what kind of impact this would have had in the courts of the rest of Europe, the monarchies, the aristocratic and royal houses throughout the rest of Europe, what kind of effect this would have had if.
Well, one of the effects that we know of is that a fair number of women from the upper stations in life joined the Poor
Mhm.
Clares or were responsible for establishing a community. Agnes' own cousin Elizabeth of Hungary uh, became a third order member, a secular Franciscan.
Mm-hmm.
Louis IX was also a secular Franciscan
Mm-hmm.
later in life, and he did a great deal to help the order. At this time, Paul mentioned that Clare was often confined to bed, and there's a charming story that I'd love to just can't resist sharing with you that not only brings that out, but also portrays that Clare's relationship to creation and to the creatures of creation was as loving and as vibrant as Francis' own,
Mm-hmm.
for which Francis is so well known. It seems, and it was Sister Francesca who told the people who were taking down the accounts for Clare's canonization, told them this story, said that there was one day when Clare was about 1240 or so, Clare was in bed working as she always did when she could, probably hemming up some linen for the altar, and realized that the next piece of cloth she wanted was over on a table that she couldn't even get out of bed to go and get. And nobody else was apparently was around at this time. One of the monastery cats was sitting there in the sun, enjoying the sunshine perhaps, and Clare probably muttered out loud, "Oh, I really wished I had that next piece of cloth." And he said that the kitten stood up, looked at her, and intrigued Clare, and she pointed to the cloth. The kitten ran over, picked it up, and started dragging it across the floor. And floors being what floors are, it's not the place
Especially in the 13th century.
when they were made of stone. Um, that Clare scolded the kitten. She said, "Oh, you little bad one, why do you drag it that way?" And according to Sister Francesca, the little cat rolled it up a bit, then so that she could pick it up in her mouth, and she carried it over to Clare. And that incident is sort of memorialized for us by this beautiful icon by Robert Lenz of Clare with a cat. She's so often shown with a monstrance that I thought it was wonderful. But she had this relationship with all of nature that Frances also had. She told her sisters when they went out of the monastery to praise all the green and flowering plants, all the human beings, all creatures. This is, she loved flowers. There were always flowers on the little terrace where she would often sit and work or pray. She had her flower boxes blooming. She loved. Francis wrote the the song of the creatures, and Clare was taken by it, and she herself, one Sister Angeluccia said, had a great devotion to water, the clear, beautiful water, and on Easter, during the Easter ceremonies, there was this quote from the Old Testament, "I saw water flowing from the right side of the temple." And this, according to Angeluccia, struck Clare so much that she always um, urged the sisters to appreciate water.
Mm-hmm.
It humble, lowly. We also know that people are formed in part by the surroundings. By the Clare grew up in the lush valley of Umbria, surrounded by these gentle mountains. Frances learned to love nature living there. Clare also was formed. She never moved, as far as we know, went any further than Perugia, which was only 12 miles from Assisi, and spent some of her childhood there. So she was formed by this lush, rich valley, um, with its fig, olives, and productive farmland that surrounded her. I love this quotation from the Old Testament that I think mirrors both Clare and Frances' view of the created world. The Lord loves all things that are, and loathes nothing that he has made. For he fashioned all things that they might have being, and the creatures of the world are wholesome. And it was to restore this wholesomeness that Jesus came. Frances realized it, and Clare knew that it was the pure of heart and the poor in spirit, another reason for embracing Lady Poverty. Only these, with these attributes, people with these attributes, could really appreciate nature and the beauty of it. So that the poor, pure of heart, the poor in spirit, are the kind of women that she was trying to form.
During this time, Clare had to contemplate not only the beauties of nature during the summer in the valley of Spoleto, or to be charmed by the antics of a small cat, probably somewhere too, even though she remained always in that enclosure, she was not unaware of the goings-on in the larger world of far weightier importance. In the summer of 1243, the Emperor Frederick II finally, at the insistence or at the persuasion, really don't know the exact circumstances, of Louis IX, King of France, released the cardinals whom he had imprisoned following the ill-fated election of Pope Celestin IV, who had succeeded Gregory IX. If you recall, we mentioned that last week. Celestin IV sickened and died only 17 days after his election as Pope, and following this horrific example of the emperor's detention of the cardinals who scattered and escaped, there had been no pope, no bishop of Rome, for 18 months. Now, with the release of these prisoners, the cardinals were able to reassemble and entered conclave early in June in 1243, and by the end of June had managed to elect a Cardinal Fieschi, who had been closely allied with Gregory IX, Cardinal Ugolino, who had been close friend of Clare and Frances, and throughout his life had been their protector, their mentor, their friend and supporter. So Cardinal Fieschi takes the name Innocent IV, and his election does not please Frederick II, since Frederick II's great nemesis, Gregory IX, was someone with whom Cardinal Fieschi had worked very closely. Cardinal Fieschi is an able, in fact, some regarded him a brilliant canonist. And immediately, Innocent tries to begin to work his way through the stalemate of negotiations and problems between the papacy and the court of Frederick II, all to no avail. And in the course of that year, following his election, no results are really improving the relationship until Frederick II decides that he wants to invite the Pope to a personal conference. Innocent IV is no fool. He realizes that there are factions even in Rome who would willingly betray him and who are loyal supporters of Frederick II. Even at the time that he invites Innocent IV to a personal conference, he and his armies are marching on Rome. Innocent does the only intelligent thing that he could, knowing full well that if he shows up for this invitation, it would be tantamount to slamming the prison doors on himself. So he very quietly and secretly escapes Rome to the port of Civitavecchia, and from there he boards a ship with members of the Curia, and they sail for Genoa, his hometown, and from Genoa make the journey overland across the Alps into southeastern France, to Lyon, where he can enjoy the protection of King Louis IX. It is from there that he begins to organize the affairs of the church in much greater security than he could have ever done in Rome at that time. Of course, this whole business infuriates Frederick II no end. And to add to all of this, as the negotiations are going nowhere, Innocent IV decides to convoke a general council of the church. And so the fathers of the church all meet in Lyon in 1245. This is just 2 years after the Pope's election. And in solemn council, they formally depose Frederick II as Holy Roman Emperor after reviewing all of the allegations, the crimes, the whole sordid history of Frederick's behavior in recent years. Frederick is counting on the fact that he will simply get away with being a very badly misunderstood son, but loyal, nevertheless loyal son of the church. This time around, it doesn't work. Frederick is deposed as Roman emperor, and the allegiances of all the other monarchs to him is absolved, and furthermore, he is excommunicated again for a second time. Now, you can understand that with all of the political problems that are going on throughout Europe at the time, no one else is really anxious to accept the imperial crown. And actually, this suits the Pope quite well, even though it even further infuriates Frederick, because now what it does, at least, is that it prevents Frederick to be able to draw on the allegiance of these other monarchs for men and supplies, armies and supplies, in order to carry out his moves politically and militarily throughout Europe, and especially on the Italian peninsula against the Papal States.
You can imagine that Innocent IV had a great deal of very important matters on his mind, but he still took time during those very same years to attend to what he thought was a major problem with the poor ladies. It's possible that his relationship with Gregory, he may even have visited some of the poor Clare poor ladies at that time, possibly even have met Clare. But as a canonist, he's very pained to see all of the various observances in the different houses. Some are following the rule of Ugolino. Some are trying to, especially Agnes of Prague, is also trying to have the privilege of poverty, and the other writings of Francis given to live them fully. Other monasteries that had been formerly Benedictine maintained mostly the Benedictine parts of the rule. For canons, it was a royal mess. So he decides to take the original rule of Ugolino, Gregory IX, written in 1219, and impose it as the one rule for all the poor ladies. Well, that did not meet with approval from anybody, not even Clare. because it did not hold the things, have the things that were most important to Clare written into it. She could manage to live with it because she ignored some things and observed what Francis had given her.
But these were in the way of exemptions for the monastery of San Damiano that Ugolino had permitted,
That's right. But
whereas this was not permitted in the other monasteries.
no, so they found this rule totally unacceptable. I'm sure letters flew to Rome from all corners. So he realized, well, that didn't work. So he decided that he would write the rule for the poor ladies. After all, he was a canonist. He knew how rules were supposed to be written. The one thing he didn't know and didn't appreciate was the vision of Francis and Clare. And the rule he wrote was dry. It was what a canonically correct,
but really devoid of the spirit.
Devoid of the spirit. And when he imposed that on all of the poor ladies in 1248, the same thing happened. They were not happy. They did not consider it was the form of life that they professed. Once more, letters come flying to Rome. This time, Innocent probably throws his hands up. He says that he really didn't mean that everybody had to observe this rule. And he kind of steps down, but what he leaves behind is chaos.
Mm-hmm. It was probably at this point that Clare realizes from all that has happened that if a rule is actually going to be written that will reflect adequately, effectively, the vision of Francis and the vision that she has embodied from Francis and lived out in her life and among the sisters at San Damiano, if this is ever going to happen, she herself is going to have to do it. The only problem with this is that in this day and age, women do not write rules.
They don't?
No woman writes a rule because the rules are written by the canonists and all the canonists are men.
Major problem.
However, Innocent IV himself, in perhaps a near state of despair over the chaos that has resulted, actually may have, there are some suggestions that he may have actually encouraged Clare herself in her decision to set about writing the rule for the poor ladies herself. So Clare gathers all of the documents, including that very early primitive snippet, a few sentences that became known as the forma vitae, the initial way of life that Francis had given Clare at the beginnings of the orders. It was all that he had ever provided her, but she takes the two rules of the friars, the one from 1219 as well as the one from 1223, or was it 1221 and 1221 and 1223. She takes Francis's testament, which was kind of subsequent to the rule and right before his death. And she takes the rule that Ugolino had written, as well as the Benedictine rule, and all of the other adaptations that have been submitted, which I'm sure Clare saw as trial balloons that were not satisfactory, but she gathers all of this material and she sets about, really for the remainder of her life. She's doing this now in 1247. She is beginning this task, taking up the pen, so to speak, and working on the rule. And she does this for the next 6 years. And really, the project is not ended until her deathbed.
Would you like to show a picture?
Sure. This is a wonderful picture that kind of captures the image of Clare in reflection with the documents and with pen in hand, pondering how best to express the vision of Francis in her rule. It's a lovely rendition of Clare in a very relaxed, pensive pose. Clare, we don't have the time to really go into all of the dimensions of the rule, but there are a few points that we would like to highlight. One of the things is that early on in any rule, they make provisions, religious rules make provisions for the acceptance of candidates. And in a variety of the rules before her, Clare sees, even in Francis's rule, that when someone is moved to join, they are to be welcomed and with kindness. But in one of the earliest rules, it says when someone is disposed to seek admission, moved by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, moved by divine inspiration. And for some reason, in all of the later documents, the phrase about divine inspiration has been omitted, and Clare reintroduces it because she is, in her reflections, so aware that it is the divine inspiration, that her vocation is the divine inspiration that she received through Francis. And so, once again, she reintroduces that element of divine inspiration into the vocation to follow the gospel this way. And another theme that's closely connected with this, that finds its way into the rule that Clare is writing, is the fact that she has found this divine inspiration in the very person and life of Francis. It was he who held up for her what she was to become, as a mirror holds up a person's image. And so Clare also uses the imagery of the mirror. Karen talked about it last week because she uses that image of the mirror in her correspondence with Agnes of Prague, but she also uses it in the rule. For she sees how powerful it was that she was able to see as in a mirror what she was to become in the life of Francis, and she wants that to be a model for the way the sisters within community see one another, that by their very lives they are mirrors in which the sisters around them can look to them and see themselves reflected and see what they are called to be and grow in unity and love and in conformity to the gospel. These are two of the very big elements that are introduced by Clare into the rule that she is writing. Karen?
The rule that she wrote was to establish a sisterhood. And one other thing about reception of candidates that she put into her rule and wasn't in Francis' rule.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it reflected the difference in the lifestyle. Francis said that those who were to be received by the minister alone. Only he had the right to do that. Clare writes that the superior, with the consent of the entire community, would receive various candidates. And this gives you an example of how Clare saw the relationship of the sisters among themselves.
Right.
They and when you live in a community like that, like I did with 12 to 18 women, you really did have to like who was received to live with you in that community. Now, Claire's goal in writing this rule was not against anything, but was for. She began and ended that rule with the words, the sisters are to observe the Holy Gospel. That's at the beginning. At the end, she says they are to observe the Holy Gospel and be faithful to the church, to the, and it was very important that the church should be there at the heart of her rule because there were so many heretical groups at that time. She knew that the sisters were to always be faithful to the church. So she was particularly happy when Cardinal Rinaldo was appointed as the cardinal protector for her order. He would be the one to whom she would be able to finally give the rule to take to Rome when it was completed. So he would turn out to be her friend to the end. According to Celano, he was a father by reason of his office, a protector by his solicitude, and ever a devoted friend in purest affection. And it's likely that he encouraged Clare to do this very unusual thing because he knew her, he knew what she was about and what she was able to do.
In large measure, Innocent's confidence in Clare might have rested on Clare's own understanding and awareness of her place in the community of poor ladies. Many of the commentators on rules say that we can really come to understand the community spirit of an order by looking at what is being said of the superior. How that, to examine the position that the superior occupies really gives a good indication of what the group is to be about. Clare uses the title abbess only once to describe the superior of the poor sisters. She never applies it to herself. She prefers to use such terms as handmaid, servant, and occasionally mother. As she's describing the role of the superior, she does draw on the earlier models, the earlier rules of the Benedictines and Ugolino's rule. And one of the phrases that she takes almost whole cloth from an earlier rule, and she says this about the abbess, she said that she, the abbess, should strive to preside over the others more by her virtues and holy behavior than by her office, so that moved by her example, the sisters might obey her more out of love than out of fear. Clare was very much aware at this time that for many abbesses, especially in the Benedictine tradition, they were accorded the honor and the veneration of bishops. Many of them are pictured, and for many of them, one of the accoutrements in the choir was a crozier that was set up at the place that the abbess ordinarily occupied. It was not uncommon to find a mitre about, whether or not the abbess actually wore the mitre at any particular point, but a mitre and a crozier were there, and she was accorded the same dignity as prelates. Now, Clare had no problem with according uh, honoring and giving the dignity to the prelates of the church or to secular princes. We've seen through her letters to Agnes of Prague that she defers to her royal status. Clare doesn't have a problem with that, but she does have a problem when spiritual dignity and temporal prestige get mixed up. And she finds that that has no place in the community of sisters. She regards herself as the servant. And in this icon, also by Robert Lenz, is a beautiful rendition of Clare washing the feet of her sisters.
She frequently did so, according to the sisters, and before their meals, she would be the one that would bring the water for them to wash their hands.
Mm-hmm. It's very much the portrait of both a mother and a servant. And Clare fleshes this out by saying that the abbess should console those who are afflicted and be likewise the last refuge for those who are disturbed. For if they fail to find in her the means of health, the sickness of despair might overcome the weak. And quite wisely, she adds to this that she should preserve the common life in everything, especially in the church, the dormitory, the refectory, the infirmary, and in clothing. I would imagine, Karen, especially for women, there was nothing in Clare's mind that should distinguish the abbess from the other sisters.
That's right.
Except her generosity in service, her solicitude, her affection, her help, and her support for her sisters. This is the way the abbess should be recognized, not by any special place in the choir, not by any special seat in the refectory, not by any difference in the sleeping arrangements, and certainly not by anything in her habit. She should be virtually indistinguishable from the rest of the sisters, except for noting that she was the one who was the servant of all. This was to be the hallmark, the great mark. But, Clare also knew that the abbess, as Francis had said, the abbess is to be so familiar with the sisters that they can speak and act toward her as ladies do with their servant. For that is the way it should be, that the abbess be the servant of all the sisters. Nevertheless, no superior, however humble or saintly, can function effectively without the support of her sisters. So as she went on to describe this, Clare also added that for God's sake, they have renounced their own wills, and that they were to make charity, humility, and unity toward one another, so that their mother, the servant, might bear all the burdens of her office more lightly. And she borrows from what Francis had written years earlier about a list of vices that detract from this charity and unity of spirit within a monastery. He had cited that the friars should guard against, but also the ladies as well, all pride, vainglory, envy, greed, worldly care, anxiety, detraction, and murmuring. And Clare goes on to add two more. No doubt she added these two that weren't in Francis's original list because she herself had witnessed how much had happened to the friars subsequent to Francis's death, how they had been torn apart by dissension and division. And so she adds that dissension and division are also vices to be guarded against at all cost in her community.
She was using many texts and very delicately weaving them together. One of the things that struck me when I was reading the original rule, I was reading along, it wasn't too different from the rule that our community was observing. And then suddenly, as I was reading a discussion of enclosure, I come to this blazing description of from Clare's heart, where she takes the very words of Francis to her and puts them right there in the center of the rule. She wants them to be where, at first it struck me as rather strange. Wouldn't you not have begun the rule by laying down the goals to which the rule was to lead the way, or perhaps have them as the epilogue, the final high point of the rule? But Clare had seen what had happened to some of Francis' writings, and she knew that it wouldn't be too hard to snip off a beginning, or an ending might get lost, or people could say, well, this is just an introduction. It doesn't bear the same weight of following through on it as the other parts of the rule do. So she puts this right there,
smack in the middle,
right smack in the middle, where nobody can take it out without it being very obvious. This entire section meant so much to Clare that it was repeated in her own testament, which was probably written in bits and pieces during this same time. But she was living in she wanted to enshrine the vision of that she and Francis had developed. So as I was looking at it, that started a discussion of the enclosure, then comes this glorious vision, and then this discussion of enclosure picks up. And it's as if the very enclosure, the discussion of it, forms a protective bracket around the vision, the heart of the rule. It's being protected by the almost by the walls.
It's being enclosed by the discussion of enclosure.
Very well put. Very well
so
put.
Symbolically and realistically, Clare protected and closed the vision within the discussion of enclosure. How astute.
Yes, and then in addition,
how beautiful.
But in addition, Clare lived in the Middle Ages. One of the books that most people would be familiar with was the Bible. The central book in the Bible itself was the book of Psalms. It was the book where was sometimes called the entire scriptures in miniature, because the Psalms reflected many or almost all of the incidents from the Old Testament, as well as they could be read, many of them, as foreshadowings of Jesus' life in the New Testament. So this center point was considered very important in the Middle Ages. And this is where Clare, as we said, enshrined the vision that she and Francis had developed for the poor ladies. She desired all of her sisters, present and to come, to strive to follow the way of life that our Blessed Father Francis taught us.
We would like to, at this point, move again into a meditative hymn that captures Clare's spirit. As you know, we've started talking about the relationship that developed between Clare and Agnes of Prague. Here's a rendition of Agnes of Prague. You can see in the lower right-hand corner her crown has been set aside, and she's cradling the monastery there at Prague, the monastery of the Poor Ladies, of which she is now the abbess. we've talked about several of her letters, and it's so beautiful that many of the highlights of these letters have been put to music, have been set to music in some beautiful hymns. And Karen, which one have we selected for this week?
The third letter that Clare wrote to Agnes is one that really shows you the heart of Clare. And she feels now that Agnes is her dearest of friends and that she can share with her anything. And she shares with her her very prayer life. Prayer for her supported her through all her struggles, all her weakness, because in prayer she tasted what she said was the hidden sweetness which God had saved for those who love him. Prayer was not a something that Clare had to do. It was where she drew her life, her nourishment, the things that what gave her the greatest joy. So the song we're going to share with you today is called Taste the Hidden Sweetness. It was set to music by a contemporary Poor Clare today, Sister Briege O'Hare from Ireland, and it is sung for us by Carmel Boyle. We put the text down so that you can follow it more closely, since it's not always easy to get the words on the first bounce, shall we say? So
we invite you now to be calm, breathe deeply if you do, um, and just relax as you listen to this beautiful expression, which is again coming from Clare herself.
Taste the hidden sweetness that lies within your heart, which God has kept for those whose lives are tender within. Place your mind in the softness of life's eternal flow. Place your soul in the brilliance of heaven's endless glow, and love him totally, who gave himself for your love, and you hold him, who holds all things in truth, and you will hold him. treasure that is life, and love him totally, who gave himself for your love, and you will hold him, who holds all things in truth, and you will hold him.
This beautiful cassette is available to be bought. And next time,
Karen, I think you're dating yourself. It's not a cassette, it's a CD, honey.
I'm sorry. Well, there you know it. This CD is available, plus some of the others of this. It's
You
called
can hold it up
Taste
for
the
you.
Hidden Sweetness is
Well.
the title of the entire CD, and it is available to be bought from the sisters in Ireland. And next time we'll give you
Mhm.
the place that you can address.
Mhm. We'd like to mention again that the basis for these series of reflections over the last couple of months, which we are going to bring to a conclusion next week, uh, are based on the research that Karen herself did while a member of the Poor Clare community in Canton, Ohio. Uh, while she was there, she spent roughly 10 years, right, Karen,
Yeah.
researching this material, and it was first published in 1984 as Clare, Her Light, and Her Song, and it was reprinted again last year on the occasion of the 800th anniversary of the founding of the Poor Clares. We felt that it was worth reprinting again, especially because it is so timely in our church right now and throughout the world, as the role of women in society, the role of women in religion, in church life, is being re-examined again and reconsidered. Clare stands out in history as one of the most formidable, one of the most astute, one of the most generous and transformative people that you would ever want to meet. Karen and I continue to believe this, and that's one of the big reasons why we wanted to present this series of reflections on her life and her times. This book is available, remains available from our website, ravensbreadministries.com. That's ravensbreadministries.com. Ravensbread Ministries is all lowercase, no spaces, and there you can find it. Among the other books that are for sale, you can find Clare, Her Light, and Her Song is available from us there. Karen?
One of the things that highlights the fact that Clare is a contemporary and is meaningful for us in this day and age is because of an incident that happened to her around the year 1250, where she was unable to join the sisters in celebrating Christmas Eve Mass at the church down in the chapel. She was too weak to go down, and she told the sisters to go. She didn't want them to miss this. But she said, it was said by the sisters whom she told this to afterwards, that she felt a little sorry for herself because these celebrations, particularly of Christmas, meant as much to her as it did to Frances.
Mm-hmm.
And she sort of said, "Oh, here I am, Lord, left alone." And there was big celebrations going on across the valley where the friars were, and Clare was given the ability to see what was going on and to hear the great music that was being sung by the friars. Uh, and so when her sisters came back to her afterwards, she said, "You left me alone, but God did not forget me." And she explained how probably she saw what was the first televised mass. And one of our, I can't remember just which pope it was, appointed her as patroness of television as a result of that experience.
And perhaps by extension, internet and Procaster as well. So we put, as everything, our endeavors and our efforts under the patronage of Clare. And as always, we want to conclude our presentation this evening by invoking God's blessing in the words of Clare herself. Invoking God's blessing on all of you. Thank you for joining us and being with us through this series of reflections. And we will see you again next week to bring these series of reflections to a close. In the meantime, we pray. May the Lord bless you and keep you.
May he show his face to you and be merciful to you.
May the Lord turn his countenance to you and give you peace.
May the Lord be with you always.
And wherever you are, may you be with him always.
We would like to say goodbye with Clare's words and wish you the peace that Clare wishes all of us. God be with you.
Good night.